Good afternoon, everybody, and today we're going to be in Chapter 15, which deals with questionnaires. Now, you might not think a person could dedicate a whole chapter to questionnaires and surveys, but there's a lot that goes into a questionnaire. They're very widely used, they're very common and popular among researchers. But the problem with questionnaires is that oftentimes they're not asking what they really should be asking. So today, let's take a look at some of the fundamentals of how to create and add to questionnaires and surveys. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Today we're in Chapter 15, which deals with questionnaires, and I'm sure this is nothing that is new to you. I would imagine each of you have had experience filling out questionnaires, but we're going to look at it from a different angle today by looking at how to design a questionnaire. Now, the slide begins with the issue of basic considerations. Questionnaire, first and foremost, is designed to be one of the most critical stages in the survey research process. When we design a research methodology, one of the basic fundamentals of research is to be able to elicit the answers that we want. Now, we have looked at different strategies along the way here over the past several weeks when it comes to experiments and surveys and basic interviews and so forth. But today we're going to look at one of the most popular ways of gathering data, and that's through the questionnaire. Now, it is a survey, and it's only as good as the questions it asks. Ask a bad question, get a bad result. Now, here's the thing about questionnaires. Questionnaires are normally, unless you are astute at developing them and know how to put the questions in and asking the right questions, they can be kind of difficult for a layman. In fact, oftentimes you'll find that you're asking the wrong questions. So many times companies will, companies will get an outside contractor, a third-party vendor, to develop the questionnaire. And there are some that are, I guess, relatively inexpensive. I think SurveyMonkey.com is a big resource for people to help develop questionnaires and surveys and so forth. But the main thing is that you need to be able to ask the right questions. Now, if you are fairly knowledgeable in what it is you want to accomplish, what answers you want to have answered, then you can do it. But normally, people will contract this function out. It is on the outside easy as it appears, but it's usually the result of long, painstaking work. It's not just a matter of sitting down and jotting down a few questions. There's a process that you go through that will help to bring about the quality and the validity of the research when it comes to the questionnaire. But it takes time. And the questions must meet the basic criteria of relevance and accuracy. Without it, you're wasting your time. So it's best for many people just to go ahead and front the money and have someone do it who is a professional. But again, it can be costly and it can be time consuming. So it's a trade-off. Do you want to risk asking wrong questions or irrelevant questions or questions that really don't hit at the heart of what you're trying to discover? Now, some of the decisions that you need to think about, what should be asked. What is it that you want to know? When I was doing my research for my PhD, I had a general idea of what I wanted to look at, and my topic involved adolescents and young adults converting to Islam from Christianity. So I wanted to see why young people, were leaving Christianity and converting to Islam, especially with the bad publicity that Muslims have had. And I had to be able to sit down from that and try to ask questions that would answer, that main research question. And I thought it was going to be simple. Folks, it took me a couple of weeks just to be able to ask 4 specific questions. So it's something that when you're looking at questions, they're not just things that come off the top of your head. You need to be finite. You need to be pinpoint accurate in what it is you want to ask, because if you aren't, then you're wasting, again, your time. How should questions be phrased? That's another issue too. Are you asking the right question? And if you are, how should you phrase it so that the person who reads it will understand what you're trying to ask? Some questions can be innocuous. They can be out there and you don't know what the person is wanting to know from you. And the disadvantage a lot of times with questionnaires is that you may not be there to explain it to them. It may be a mail-out questionnaire, and I've done those, and I've received those. And it may ask questions, and I can't talk to the person to find out, well, what do you mean by this or that or the other? So you have to be careful with your phrasing. And what sequence should the questions be arranged? And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. What layout will be best for the research objectives? And how should the questionnaire be pre-tested? And does the questionnaire need to be revised? So these are some of the considerations in the design of your questionnaire that you need to be able to answer. Now let's move on. And when we see here what questions should be asked, the first thing that we're having to deal with is the relevancy of the questionnaire. All information collected should address a research question in helping the decision maker in solving the current business problem. So if you are asking a quality control department in a questionnaire some of the issues that they are facing with the production or productivity or quality of the product that your business is making, you want to make sure that those questions deal with just that. You don't want to ask them about the work environment or anything that may distract them. You want to know what is going on with quality control and the problems that they are facing in quality control. Now, questionnaire accuracy, and that's increasing the reliability and validity of respondent information. And it requires several things. First of all, your questions should be simple. And I have seen some questionnaires that are very complex. You're writing, it seems like a paragraph in just a question. And you can get lost in all of that. One of the issues that I deal with when I grade papers is people trying to cram too much stuff into one sentence. And it's the same thing for questionnaires. If you cram too much stuff in there, you're going to lose the reader. So it should be simple. It should be understandable. Don't use big words that you normally don't use in normal conversation, and non-irritating words. Doing questionnaires is irritating enough as it is. So try to use words that are neutral. I don't know of an example right now of non-irritating words, but you may repeat words over and over and over, and that can be irritating to a person. So make it unbiased, make it unambiguous. Make sure you say what you need to say, and the person can understand it. Now, questionnaire design should facilitate recall and motivate respondents to cooperate. Don't confuse the person, but also you need to word it in a way that they can remember or bring to mind the issues or events that you're trying to get at. You may be trying to question a population group to see if they like craft food over let's say, Sam's Choice food, and you would ask them, when was the last time you had Kraft macaroni and cheese? And they could probably bring that to recall because it's fairly popular. Have you ever had generic macaroni and cheese? And a lot of people have had generic macaroni and cheese. Which one did you prefer? See, things should come to recall quickly for them. They shouldn't have to think back to when they were children and their first experience eating macaroni and cheese. They're not going to remember that. So you need to facilitate recall. Proper question wording and sequencing to avoid confusion and biased answers. And your textbook talks about that, and we're going to look at that in a few slides coming up. But really, what you don't want to do is use words or questions that are going to bias an answer. For instance, if you wanted to, let's say, poll an audience on how they feel about the Second Amendment and their gun rights, you may word questions like, do you believe Americans need 100 rounds in a clip? I think that's what some of these people are accusing gun owners of having. Do you believe that any and everybody should have access to a gun? And they can word it in a way that they can use it against you in so much as biasing the answers to get the ends that they want. So you have to be careful with that. Now, some of the types of questionnaires, you have open-ended questions, and this is just, tell me about the best car you've ever driven. What was it about? Or what did you like about it? These are ways that they can come up with their own answers. They're not locked into a yes or no or whatever type of response, but they can open up and explain in their own words how they feel about something. And as you see here, there are advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages, especially when you're looking at exploratory research, they can give you a range of responses that you might not even thought about. It can reveal unanticipated reactions towards the product, are good first questions because they allow the person to warm up to the questioning process. But the disadvantage is the high cost of administering open-ended response questions. Again, you have to know what you're going to be asking, or you're wasting your time. Interviewer bias may influence the answer, and bias introduced by articulate individuals elicit longer answers. So you may have a questionnaire, and goodness, it could be going on and on. So there are advantages and disadvantages to the open-ended response. Now, on the other end, you have fixed alternative questions. And these are questions in which respondents are given specific, limited alternative responses, and they're asked to choose the one closest to their own viewpoint. And their advantages and disadvantages, and we'll take a look here in the next slide, some of examples of these. But some of the advantages is that it requires less interviewer skill, takes less time to answer, it's easier for the respondent to answer to it, and it provides comparability of answers. You can compare them to others. Disadvantages, well, because it is fixed, they don't have the opportunity to embellish or to emphasize or to further elaborate on answers. And the respondent can choose convenient alternatives. So I really don't feel this way, but I guess I'll just answer yes without giving it much thought. So those are some of the positive and negative attributes of a fixed alternative questionnaire. And here's some of the types. You have simple dichotomy, just yes or no, which one? And again, you're hamstringing the person into answering one or the other. And for simple questions that require straightforward answers, that's okay. But more complex questions that require more in-depth, you wouldn't want to use this. Determinate choice question. And this requires a respondent to choose one response from among multiple alternatives. Do you prefer Ford, Chevrolet, GM, or whatever? And they would, of course, circle the one that they like the best. Frequency determination question. And this one asks about the general frequency of occurrences. How often do you shop online? Often, occasionally, never. So this would be a frequency determination. And checklist question. Allows a respondent to provide multiple answers to a single question by checking off items. Oftentimes, you may see, especially with advertisements for college, pick the subjects or disciplines that you are most interested in, and they would have a bunch of alternatives there, psychology, criminology, political science, and so forth. And you would just check off all of the ones that you liked or that you would choose. But this gives you a way of determining all of the likes or most of the likes of that respondent. Now, telephone personal interview surveys, you can use those. The best by far is the personal interview. It does allow you to have a face-to-face, even if you're asking them giving them a questionnaire. They can always stop and ask you questions about it, and you can, elaborate on maybe questions that they don't understand. Telephone would be the second best because you do have a direct communication with that person. You just don't see them face to face, so they can ask questions. It does take time. You are limited in the number of people you can see or interview at any given time because it's one-on-one. But they should be effective if you're using it right. And you see here questionnaires for telephone and personal interviews should be written in a conversational style. So you wouldn't want to be mechanical. And I have had those, and you've probably seen also recordings or heard on the telephone recordings. Would you be willing to take a brief survey after this phone call? And you can do that. So now that is mechanical, but at least you're getting the job done, and you're using technology to be able to facilitate that. Now, guidelines for constructing questions. You want to avoid complexity. Again, use simple conversational language. Avoid leading and loaded questions. I believe I told everybody when Clinton was president, we had the issue of partial birth abortion, and the government set up a phone line where citizens could call the White House and give their opinion on how they felt about partial birth abortion. And when I called to give them my peace of mind, the recorded voice asked, "Do you believe in a woman's right to choose?" That was the question. It was a loaded question. It was not dealing with anything that had to do with the issue of partial birth abortion, other than should a woman be able to do that to an unborn child. So you have to be careful with some of the questions that you're asking. Avoid ambiguity. Be as specific as possible, which means say what you've got to say in as few words as possible. Avoid making assumptions, and that's pretty much removing your bias and your stereotypes when you're asking questions, and don't think just because you think the answer is going to be obvious that they're going to be answering that way. Avoid burdensome questions that may tax the respondent's memory. Again, don't ask them, what was your first experience like when you ate macaroni and cheese as a child. They're not going to remember that. It needs to be current or something that could facilitate easy recall, and then make certain questions generate variance. These are some tactics um, that you can use to uh, vary the answers. Uh, you may have, what are some of the issues with this company that are most concerned, give you the most concern? And they can give you different answers to that. Well, it's HR, it's management, it's the environment or work hours. You can get a lot of information when you are asking questions the right way, and especially if you do, as they say here, generate variance in the answers. Order bias. What's the best sequence? Well, order bias is causing, or it is the influence of earlier questions in a questionnaire to influence how a person will answer later questions. For instance, you may ask a question, do you remember, were you alive, or do you remember the events that surrounded 911? How do you feel about the increase in radical Islam? What do you feel about terrorism in the world? And what you're doing is you're asking questions that are really fixing a person's mind on negative aspects of your objective. If you're wanting to get negative influence or negative responses about Islam, let's say, that would be how you go about it. You set a negative foundation, and then you just build off of that. And as the person ruminates over these answers, they're going to become more likely to answer in a negative way subsequent answers. Now, funnel technique is asking general questions about specific questions in order to obtain unbiased responses. What is your feeling about the quality of our product? And you may want to know if there's room for innovation or if they're wanting more. So you can ask general questions and then get down to specifics so that you're not biasing the responses. You're just trying to give them a broad field, and as you continue, you get more finite, as a funnel would do. Filter question. That's a question that screens out respondents who are not qualified to answer a second question. Oftentimes, especially when you're looking at the resumes that are done electronically, if you answer one question the wrong way, it'll drop you out, and your resume will go into a bin, a junk bin. And this is kind of like that. If you answer one question, it may filter you out from answering more questions because you're just not going to be qualified. Pivot question. And that's a filter question used to determine which version of a second question will be asked. You may have heard about decision trees. If this happens, then do this. Did this happen? Then if it did, you can go here and here. Or if it didn't, you can go here and here. So a filter question will emerge or evolve as the preceding question is asked. And as they answer, the questions will be determined by that. Now, traditional questionnaires, multiple grid question, it has several similar questions arranged in a grid format. You'll have maybe a section on attitude and another section on quality and another section on customer service, something like that. And the title of a questionnaire should be phrased carefully. You want to be able to articulate the importance of the research, the nature of the study, appeal to the respondent's ego, I really, other than just being respectful and making them feel like they are valued and their response is valued, there's not a whole lot you can do on a questionnaire to really appeal to their ego. Emphasize the confidential nature of the study if it is confidential. If it's a market research study, it really doesn't matter if you talk to other people, but there are some studies that may be confidential. To not bias the respondent in the same way that a leading question might. So you want to be mindful of the ethics of these, and just be cognizant of it so that you avoid these mistakes and traps. Now today we're seeing a lot of electronic surveys. I was at Olive Garden and my son works there as he manages and does everything. But occasionally he'll go back to waiting on tables if they're short-handed, and we try to go when we know he's going to be waiting on tables. So whenever he waits on us, at the end he will show me the little kiosk that's there on the table, and he'll ask for me to make sure that whatever I do before I leave, fill out the survey that Olive Garden has on their waiters, and they tie their job performance to that. So it's a very important thing now, and that's electronic. You just sit there and answer the questions, and it's a Likert scale type of survey or questionnaire. How would you rate your waiter's performance? Bad, good, indifferent, whatever. And that's not really what it says, but I can't remember exactly what it says, but you get the point. So using technology now has gotten to be a fairly common means of surveying and questioning people. We have software today. For instance, you see here GUI, which is graphic user interface, which you can control how the displays look, how you can ask questions and so forth, so that the person can have a pleasant and easy interface with the technology as they're being surveyed. You do have layout issues. You can go from screen to screen, or you can scroll. So those are some of the options that are available to you. You have push button technology, which you can hit a button and that button will do certain things. Mainly, once you've finished with the questionnaire, you can hit the push button, submit, and that's what will submit the questionnaire. So you have that technology. Status bar, I love these because it tells me that eventually I'm going to get through with this survey, and it shows me how close I am to the finish. Radio button, it's a circular icon that looks like a button, and it activates one response choice and deactivates others when a respondent clicks on it. I don't see these, I'm not familiar with them, but I'm sure they are out there and being used quite frequently. Drop down box, you've seen those. You've got that little arrow on the side of a rectangle, and once you click it, all different types of options drop down and you just go there. Check boxes, where you click and the box will have an X or a check or whatever. Open-ended boxes, you can type your own answers to the questions. Pop-up boxes, they appear at selected points and contain information or instructions for respondents. A lot of times you may see a survey and it'll have a little question mark icon, and that would be a pop-up box. It'll show you different ways of or different information that you need to know about the place where you're at. Now, the next two slides are just examples. I'll let you take a look at that. The next page is a push button page. You have a drop-down box there. Select year, select month. And these are some more where you have the check box and the open-ended question and the radio button. There we go. It's the Likert scale thing or the alternate answer format where you can answer one and the rest will be taken out. And then you have some of the layouts that the internet provides today. And this will be our last slide. You have variable piping software. It allows variables to be inserted into an internet questionnaire as a respondent is completing it. Error trapping controls the flow of an internet questionnaire. Forced answering software prevents the person from continuing with an internet questionnaire if they fail to answer a question. Again, if you answer the wrong question or if you don't meet the criteria, it will stop you there. Interactive help desk. Oftentimes, if you need problem solving, you have support that can help you with that. Usually it's a chat room. I don't like using those because you never know who you're dealing with. I'm still old-fashioned. I like getting on the phone and being able to talk to a person. But today, chatting back and forth will solve the question. You have FAQs that can help you now if you're having problems. Normally, mine is the only problem not listed on the FAQ, but it's still an option for you. So using technology today, and this is what we're getting at, is getting to be more prevalent than the old paper and pencil type of format where you just had to sit down and write everything out and then send it off or whatever. Today we can use technology, but we need to understand the fundamentals of it so that we can effectively use it and be more efficient and effective in our business research. Today we had an overview of what a questionnaire is and some of the dynamics and mechanics of putting together a questionnaire. Questionnaires, as I said at the beginning, it's probably one of the most popular and most used research tools. It's very easy to distribute and you can go out to a mass number of respondents. The only problem is that you need to make sure you're asking what you're asking. Once again, validity, reliability, those are two issues that really deal a lot with specifically questionnaires. Well, that's all we have for today, and we'll come back tomorrow and continue on with Chapter 16.